So much of how we understand ourselves is filtered through expectations about how we should act, look, or present ourselves to others. Because of this, identity becomes something constantly shifting. It's always in flux, and expressing it feels difficult when we're taught to hide parts of ourselves, cover our shame, and fit into standards that society has invented. People say they want authenticity, but often only a softer, acceptable version that's easy to consume and normalize. If everyone is trimming themselves down to meet these expectations, how can we tell what's real anymore? Identity involves exposure and self-revelation, and it's about making space to exist without being shaped by what others think you should be. Otherwise, even being authentic becomes another performance, and that can be damaging in the long run. This is why these ideas matter so much in contemporary art. Artists like Cindy Sherman and Gillian Waring show identity as something performed or unstable, while others like Tracy Emin and Nan Goldin work with vulnerability, truth-telling, and self-disclosure. We also see artists who use exposure as a method, almost like a form of emotional or physical endurance, such as Jenny Saville and Ted-Ching Hsieh. Historically, Frida Kahlo stands out as a key figure who've transformed these themes into powerful visual form. Artists have been exploring identity as something that is performed through transformation, leaning into the idea that identity can be fabricated and stretched into reality. As Butler explains, identity isn't fixed but is created through repeated acts, and when these acts are disrupted, they destabilize established norms. The possibilities of gender transformation are to be found in the possibility of a failure to repeat, a deformity, or a parodic repetition that exposes the phantasmatic effect of abiding identity as a politically tenuous construction, 1999, page 179. This idea that identity can be constructed autonomously raises the questions about the tension between visibility and concealment, highlighting how the artist can control what is revealed and what is hidden. Cindy Sherman uses her invented personas to challenge the idea of an authentic self. She conceals her identity to push the boundaries of expression, using artificial means to disappear into her characters, focusing more on the transformation of the stereotypical roles her characters play to draw attention to the conventionalized roles that women are put into. She has talked about dressing up to explore the possibilities of her identity. She said that for a long time the characters were to ask those same questions. Maybe this is who I want to be. Sherman, 2016. This constant rehearsal of the self through her characters creates a mediation between herself and her work. The idea of self-evaluation and transformation into the person you want to be aligns with Butler's idea that identity, especially gender identity, is not an inner essence but performance that is a repeated act shaped by social norms and cultural scripts sustained by its continuous performance. Sherman's way of performing various female stereotypes and not revealing a stable self demonstrates that femininity is a social script and not an inner truth. And by using makeup, wigs, and costumes, she exposes how identity is manufactured. Through hiding herself, she reveals the constructability of identity. In Signs That Say What You Want Them to Say and Not Signs That Say What Someone Else Wants Them to Say, 1992 to 1993, Gillian Waring complicates the relationship between self-construction and social expectation. In Signs, she asks strangers to write down their inner thoughts on a blank card and photograph them. She lays bare the way that people adopt and internalize societal scripts in a way that conceals their true thoughts and feelings, masking parts of their identity to conform to societal pressures. The Guardian, 2022. Waring unmasks the tension between inner experience and outward social persona by showing how the self is mediated by normative influences. As Judith Butler writes, there is no gender identity behind the expressions of gender. That identity is performatively constituted by the very expressions that are said to be its results. Butler, 1999, page 33. Waring visually communicates this idea that there's no true inner identity that exists before expression. Saleh, 2002. The individuals must phrase their identity through socially available language. That expression may be shaped by what society allows them to think about themselves, which could mean that their authentic self is constructed through that act of expression. Waring exposes how identity can be shaped by social language and how there's a gap between what the subject reveals and how the audience views it as their identity. The disconnection between the confident man admitting desperation, the put-together woman expressing fear, and the teenager revealing insecurity supports Judith Butler's idea that identity is a contradiction and doesn't pre-exist expression. It's unstable and dependent on norms that are negotiated through the subject's inner self and the societal pressure on what language is deemed the safest to exist in. Building on Butler's concept of performative constructed identity and Waring's exploration of how individuals articulate the self within normative language, Anil Moholy introduces the political elements to question representation. Moholy's work confronts the historical erasure and mischaracterization of black, queer, and trans bodies. Their self-portraits show that identity is both performed and negotiated under the influence of forces that seek to control it. Moholy's Somnayama Gonyama 2014-2017 series reveals the visual erasure and stereotyping of black bodies. A use of high contrast lighting, props that allude to playfulness but point out the underlying harsh realities of historical oppression, colonial visuality and labour, whilst reclaiming visual power. Koza 2021, page 274 to 275. While that high contrast imagery and use of stylized concealment create a tension between visibility and protection, highlighting the political risk of being seen, Moholy often looks directly at the viewer, creating a sense of confrontation and a firm directness, which shows the deliberately constructed posing of the subject being both visible and in control of the image, emphasizing the resistance of stereotypes and the mischaracterization of black queer individuals. Bell Hooks' concept of oppositional gaze is vital here, as it helps articulate that the act of being seen becomes political, especially for the black queer subject. There is power in looking, Hooks 1992, page 115. Suggests that seeing and being seen can be an act of resistance, as Moholy's self-portraits are deliberately controlled, gaining the sense of self-authorship rather than dehumanization. Using this power, Moholy's work presents the risks of being seen as a black queer subject and demonstrates the idea that looking is powerful. Their portraits make visible identities that have been ignored or misunderstood, claiming both recognition and strength. Before Butler articulated the notion of performativity, Frida Kahlo was already exploring the self through gestures of pain, shame, and resilience through her paintings. Kahlo's practice is historically crucial to understanding vulnerability as a performance. While contemporary artists such as Gillian Waring expose the gap between inner truth and social performance, Cindy Sherman fabricates female stereotyped identities, and Anil Moholy uses visibility as empowerment. Kahlo used herself as a subject to reveal her pain, leaving us to wonder how exposing her own wounds blurs the line between truth and performance. In her work The Broken Column 1944, she displays her pain through visuals such as the exposed spine, the nails piercing her skin, and the tears on her face, whilst holding an unwavering confrontational gaze that compels you to look and gaze upon her vulnerability and suffering. Herrera, 1983. Kahlo constructs her identity as something that's forged through endurance and visibility. Her refusal to make her trauma palatable to the public and not to conform her pain to the idealized body imagery makes her work especially powerful. This approach paved the way for later contemporary artists to articulate trauma through visuals that communicate more than language can, which is often constrained by social norms. As Roland Barthes wrote, the photographic image is a message without a code, Barthes 1977, which expresses the idea that visual images communicate what language cannot, and that through visual form we can gain significantly more knowledge about someone's inner world as an alternative to the constraints of language, leaving room for interpretation. Powerfully demonstrated through Kahlo's Henry Ford Hospital 1932, where she brings the taboo subject of miscarriage into the public eye. The floating objects tied to her exposed body symbolize the extensions of loss, a visual sign that surpasses the limits of language, Herrera, 1983. Kahlo turns a private, often hidden experience into something that demands to be seen, directly addressing the fact that some forms of pain can't fully be conveyed through words alone. Her use of visual imagery and symbolism expresses what language fails to capture, and by confronting visibility, she broadens what art is allowed to show and places the body as a tool for communicating the lived experience. The painting exposes how the visual breaks the silence around female trauma and opens the emotional and political possibilities of representation. All the world is not, of course, a stage, but the crucial ways in which it isn't are not easy to specify, Goffman 1959. Even though life isn't literally a stage, it's hard to tell where real behaviour ends and performance begins. The line between genuine expression and stage behaviour is therefore blurry, making authenticity and performance almost inseparable. Tracey Emin's video work Why I Never Became a Dancer in 1995 is a perfect example of this. In the video, she tells stories from her teenage years in Margate, including her encounters with older men, the humiliation she suffered at the hands of the local boys, and her desire to escape through dancing. Xavier Hufkins, Samlon Gowitz. The video piece combines still images, shots of Margate, and Emin's voiceover, creating an intimate, direct feel that's enhanced by the video. Though Emin's narration feels raw and honest, it is carefully planned. She decides what to reveal and what to leave out and controls how the story unfolds to shape the viewer's emotional experience. This reflects Goffman's point that it is often hard to tell the difference between genuine feeling and a performed behaviour, Goffman 1959. Emin's constructed narrative in the video follows a dramatic structure, showing her rebelliousness to the rules and her sexual relationships with older men, the boy shouting slag at the dance competition, provoking a sense of humiliation and the power of using their chants as self-liberation. It gives the impression of emotional truth, but is also an artistic construction, shaped to produce a satisfying resolution. Samlon Gowitz, no date. This demonstrates that in autobiographical art, honesty is not simply recorded but is created through careful storytelling. Emin shows how autobiographical art can balance openness with self-presentation. And like Emin, Nan Goldin explores confessional aesthetics through photography. While Emin turns her past into a continuous narrative, Goldin captures singular emotionally intimate moments. This is shown in The Ballad of Sexual Dependency in 1985 to 1986. She photographs the people she has connection with, such as her friends, lovers, and the communities around her. Goldin 2022. The image of Nan and Brian in bed, 1983, shows a moment of closeness and vulnerability where Brian sits smoking and looking away from the camera while Goldin stares at him. It evokes a sense of closeness, but paired with Goldin's longing stare, it shifts to a more uncertain tone. The contrasting sense of intimacy and instability shows that intimacy can be uncomplicated yet lived in tension. Images feel spontaneous and diary-like, giving the impression of unfiltered truth. Goldin has emphasized that primarily the art is not photography, the art is editing. The point is making cinematic work out of still images. Goldin 2022. Through careful selection, sequencing, and presentation, the work shows that its power not only indicates the rawness of the moments, but also how they are constructed to guide the viewer emotionally. Tiao Fan 2021. Goldin also reflects on disconnect between herself and her artistic persona. Nan Goldin is not in this house. Only when I'm given a talk, then I'm Nan Goldin. If you believe your own myth, it'll destroy you. Goldin 2022. This reveals that even her most confessional images involve performance, and the truth of the photographs is inseparable from the personas she presents through her work. At the same time, her photography is motivated by the desire to connect with both the people she photographs and the viewers as she preserves relationships and shared experiences across time. Atwell, 2023. In this way, Goldin's confessional honesty, like Emin's, emerges from the tension between lived experience of emotional vulnerability and deliberate artistic construction. A key part of confessional aesthetics involves the act of exposing the self to others, and the risks that come with it. Shame can often be intertwined with exposure, as it creates a moment of acknowledgement of being seen. Eve Kozlowski-Sedgwick writes about this process, as she argues that shame is deeply tied with how identity is formed, especially in moments where the self feels exposed or vulnerable. Shame and identity remain in very dynamic relation to one another, at once deconstituting and foundational, because shame is both particularly contagious and peculiarly individuating. Sedgwick 2002. This means that shame can play a part in destroying the self, but can build itself up through visibility. This supposed relationship can happen between the audience and the artist, creating an invisible connection between them. It's something that cannot be done in isolation. This understanding of shame as relational gives confessional art central meaning. When artists reveal vulnerable aspects of their lives, they not only reveal their inner truth, but they can also create a moment of emotional exposure that can reshape how they see themselves and how others see them, drawing power from confession to navigate the complicated feelings that come with being seen, judged, or misunderstood. While artists like Emin and Goldin work through personal storytelling, other contemporary artists deal with exposure in a different yet similarly revealing ways. Tetchin Shea and Jenny Saville both push the body into a space of intense visibility, using endurance and persistent effort to draw the audience attention in a way that exposes the emotional and conceptual side. Jenny Saville's paintings draw attention to the body, more specifically how the flesh is thickly painted with oil paints to reveal the imperfections and the vulnerability that comes with it. Propped 1992 depicts her own body contorted and enlarged, while the thick texture of paint illuminates how she challenges the historical notions of the perfected female form, Gagosian no date. The sense of shame that comes from one's body being judged reinforces the connection between the audience, making the piece a space where social judgments, shame, and identity physically settle. Seville's work mirrors Cedric's idea that shame is both individual and collective, with the body being deeply personal and shaped by external pressures and expectations of others. Her paintings lay bare the vulnerability and power that come with being seen, making the viewers experience a moment where the body is vulnerable yet commanding. Etching Shea exposes exposure through endurance and the erasure of privacy. In his one-year performance 1980 to 1981 time clock piece, Shea subjected himself to intense visibility by punching a clock every hour for an entire year. The work isn't a confessional piece. He places his time and body under extreme gaze and judgment, which remove the boundary between life and performance. Exposes the self in a way that's impossible to hide. This forced visibility echoes Cedric's idea that identity can be deconstituting and foundational, Cedric 2002. As Shea's performances strip away his autonomy, he constructs a new self-defined identity through endurance by making exposure literal, which turns discipline, fatigue, and vulnerability into a central part of the performance. Both Seville and Shea use exposure as method, not by confessing through words, but by working through the body. They show how identity can be reshaped or destabilized while being deeply perceived by the audience, Ingham 2010. Exposure therapy is described as a method that helps people overcome fear and anxiety by gradually confronting fear under controlled conditions, Harvard Health Publishing 2024. Using this logic, artists who work with self-disclosure can face their trauma and weaknesses publicly under controlled aesthetic conditions, while inviting themselves and the viewer to confront discomfort. Ingham notes that artists can make internal processes and vulnerabilities visible, highlighting the performative and constructed nature of the self. Over time, this act of exposure can transform shame or trauma into a tool for visibility and connection. When facing what is feared, it reduces its power. Identity is something that is never stable. It's always changing and shaped through the acts in which we reveal ourselves and how others perceive and interpret those fragments. Gaining knowledge on the different approaches of identity through artists like Sherman, Waring, Moholy, Carlo, Emin, Golden, Seville, and Shea, we can understand that there is no true way to express the inner self. In their practices, the self is constructed and mediated, creating new forms of identity that are always in motion. Each work reveals a past self that is continuously transforming through artistic expression. This transformation takes many forms, such as painting, photography, performance, endurance, and confession, which shows how identity is dynamic and complex. Constant change of identity through time makes exploring individuality more compelling, as even moments of discomfort allow one to experience, lay bare, and connect their identity to the world.